All right, today we're diving into an absolutely incredible story from ancient history. It's this high-stakes showdown, a real David and Goliath situation between a tiny kingdom and a world-conquering empire. We're talking about a clash of raw military power, some seriously sophisticated psychological warfare, and, well, an unshakable belief that changes everything.
And the whole thing is perfectly summed up in this one incredibly arrogant taunt from the bad guy of our story, King Sennacherib of the mighty Assyrian Empire. This quote just cuts right to the heart of the conflict, right? You've got this unstoppable force of an empire running headfirst into the immovable object of a small nation's fate.
So who is this guy, this incredibly confident king? Well, Sennacherib was the leader of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and he was at the absolute peak of his power. His armies, they were the most feared military force on the planet at the time. I mean, they were known for being brutally efficient with cutting-edge siege tactics. They were, for all practical purposes, completely unstoppable. Okay, and what's really fascinating here is the timing. According to the account in the Hebrew Bible, this massive invasion happens right after King Hezekiah of Judah has been, a really faithful leader, carrying out all these major reforms. So just as he's getting his house in order, Sennacherib's army just sweeps into the land of Judah. They start taking down fortified cities left and right, and they have one primary target in their sights, the capital city, Jerusalem. And here's the thing about the Assyrians. They didn't just fight with swords and siege engines. They fought with words. Their main argument was basically just their resume. Sennacherib's messengers would shout it from the walls. "We have crushed every other nation that stood against us." The logic was brutal and honestly pretty simple. If all those other gods were powerless to save their people, what on earth makes you think your God is going to be any different?
So, you've got this terrifying war machine rolling towards you. What do? Well, Hezekiah doesn't just panic or wait around. He comes up with this brilliant two-part strategy for survival. It's this amazing combination of really practical, clever engineering and a powerful appeal to the hearts and minds of his people.
Okay, so first, let's talk about the practical side. This is some seriously strategic thinking for ancient warfare. Hezekiah immediately goes after the city's biggest weakness, water. He blocks up all the springs outside the city walls. The thinking was, why should the Assyrian king show up and find a ton of water waiting for them? Smart, right? Then he gets to work on the actual defenses, patching up every single break in the wall, building new towers, and even adding a whole new outer wall. And all the while, his workshops are just cranking out weapons and shields. And that brings us to part 2 of his strategy. After all the physical work is done, shoring up the walls and everything, he gathers his people to shore up their morale. He draws this amazing contrast. He says the Assyrians, they just have the arm of flesh, basically human strength. But we, he says, we have a greater power on our side, and the account tells us it worked. The people actually gained confidence from what he said. So the stage is set, right? The city is fortified, the people's spirits are high, and that's when the first major assault begins. But it's not with battering rams, it's not with siege towers, it's an attack aimed squarely at the minds of everyone defending Jerusalem. Yeah, this is psychological warfare 101. Sennacherib's commanders knew exactly what they were doing. They figured if they could break the people's will to fight, the city's strong walls wouldn't even matter. The whole goal was to make the defenders feel completely hopeless, totally isolated, and absolutely abandoned. So this really brings the two competing messages into sharp focus. On one side, you've got Sennacherib's guys shouting messages of pure despair. Hezekiah is lying to you. You're all going to die of hunger and thirst. Your God can't save you. But on the other side, you have Hezekiah's message of hope. Be strong. Don't be afraid. The Lord our God will help us. This was the real battle. A battle for belief. And check out how calculated this was. The Assyrian officers, they didn't speak in Aramaic, which was like the diplomatic language of the time. Nope. They shouted all their threats in Hebrew, the everyday language of the common soldiers and the citizens standing on that wall. It was a direct play to bypass the leadership and plant fear straight into the hearts of the people.
And you know what? The psychological attack was working. The city was completely surrounded. The people were terrified. The most powerful army in the world was literally at their doorstep. The whole situation had reached an absolute tipping point.
So, with all the military and engineering prep done, and this war of words raging outside the walls, Hezekiah makes his final move. And it's not a military counterattack. It's not some secret new defensive plan. According to the biblical account, he and the prophet Isaiah, they just cried out in prayer. And this brings us to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? Everything that can be done,
has been done. The walls are strong, the speeches have been given, the threats have been made. Realistically, there's just no way they should survive this. So, what happens next?
The answer we get from the book of Chronicles is, well, it's stunningly simple. The Lord sent an angel. Just one.
And the result? Absolute, catastrophic, total devastation for the Assyrian army. In a single night, the entire command structure, all the commanders, all the officers, and the core of the fighting force were just annihilated. What looked like an inevitable conquest turned into a complete and total rout overnight. So what about the guy who boasted that no god could possibly stop him? Sennacherib limps back to his own country in utter disgrace. And his end? Man, it is deeply ironic. The account says that while he was worshiping in the temple of his own god, the very kind of god he mocked as powerless, he was cut down and assassinated by his own sons. But wait, the story doesn't just end with Sennacherib's defeat. We have to look at what happened after all this for King Hezekiah, because his legacy, well, it gets a lot more complicated than you might think.
So after this completely impossible victory, Hezekiah's reputation just skyrockets on the world stage. The historical account says that from that moment on, he was highly regarded by all the nations. Leaders from all the surrounding kingdoms started bringing these valuable gifts to Jerusalem, basically acknowledging this incredible thing that had just happened.
And with all this new respect, of course, came incredible wealth. The account goes into detail, listing all his riches, treasuries just overflowing with silver and gold, huge buildings for grain, wine, and oil, stalls for all kinds of cattle, pens for massive flocks. I mean, he acquired huge numbers of herds. Everything he touched turned to gold. But here's where the story takes a critical turn. After all that success, after the miracle, after the international fame, the account says that Hezekiah's heart became proud. And isn't that a fascinating psychological twist? The very event that should have made him incredibly humble instead fed his arrogance. I guess when you witness a miracle on that scale, it might be dangerously easy to start thinking that all that glory is somehow about you.
His story does end on a more nuanced note, though. Before disaster could strike because of this pride, Hezekiah humbled himself. He repented for it. And because he did that, the narrative says the consequences were put on hold, and Jerusalem stayed safe for the rest of his time as king.
And that really brings us to our final thought. We've just walked through this incredible story of military strategy, of intense psychological warfare, and of a jaw-dropping reversal. It's a story that pits the arm of flesh against the power of belief, but it's also a powerful cautionary tale about what can happen after the big victory. So it leaves us with this question. What does this ancient story really show us about the tricky relationship between power, pride, and belief, especially when you're in a crisis?